Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. You guys have given us a collection of excerpts from 3 different books, all dealing with Islamic theology and Quranic interpretation.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, these are not your typical Islamic texts.
Yeah, definitely not.
These are diving into some pretty controversial waters by exploring this idea of a created Lord.
A created Lord.
Right. It's definitely not mainstream Islamic thought.
Yeah, these texts present a really unique perspective on Jibril, the angel Gabriel, in relation to Allah.
Right.
And they're really arguing that he's not just this messenger, but he's actually this really powerful being with a specific type of lordship, but while still being created by Allah.
Okay, so essentially we're kind of asking this question. Can a being be both created and a Lord?
Yeah.
It seems like that kind of contradicts the idea of Tawhid,
right?
The Islamic belief in the oneness of God.
That's a fascinating question. And that's really kind of at the heart of this whole deep dive. A Tawhid is like the bedrock of Islamic belief, the idea that there's only one God, Allah. But these authors are trying to reconcile that fundamental principle with this idea that Jibril might have a more complex role than we traditionally understand.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. So how are they approaching this? What kind of evidence are they using to support this created Lord concept?
Well, they're digging deep into the Quran, examining the language, the grammar, the context of different verses. They're very meticulous about looking at specific words and phrases.
So they're not just making this up.
No.
They're actually finding evidence within the Quran itself.
Within the Quran.
Can you give me an example? What kind of clues are they finding?
So one of the key things they point to is the way the Quran uses the word Lord.
Okay.
Now, in Arabic, there's this distinction between Rab Alamin, which means Lord of the Worlds, and that's almost always used to refer to Allah. Right. And then just simply Rab, which means Lord, and that's sometimes used for Jibril. They argue that this difference in wording is actually significant.
Okay, so even the language itself is suggesting this hierarchy. Like Rab al-Alamin implies a universal kind of lordship, something that only Allah possesses, while Rab could suggest a more limited created lordship.
Exactly. They're saying that even within the language of the Quran, there are these hints that support this idea of these different levels of divine power, which, potentially could change how we view Jibril's role.
Okay, so they're saying Allah is the ultimate boss.
The Lord of the Worlds.
Lord of the Worlds. And Jibril is more like a regional manager with authority, but still answerable to the CEO.
That's a great way to put it. They're drawing this clear distinction between Allah as like the source of all creation, right? The one who determines the grand scheme of things, like the afterlife. And then Jibril, who's this powerful being, yes, but one who's more involved in the day-to-day operations.
Right.
Interacting with prophets, delivering revelations.
This is getting into like some deep theological territory.
Yeah.
Are they suggesting that there are 2 lords in Islam?
Yeah.
That seems like it would directly clash with Tawhid.
That's a really important question, and it's something they address head on.
Okay.
They're not saying there's 2 equal lords in Islam.
Right.
They're very careful to emphasize that Allah's lordship is absolute, uncreated, while Jibril's lordship is derived from Allah.
Right.
And therefore, it's a created kind of lordship.
So it's like a hierarchy of lordship.
Yeah.
Allah is the ultimate Lord, the source of all creation and power, while Jibril, though powerful and possessing a form of lordship, is ultimately subordinate to Allah.
Exactly. They argue that the Quran itself supports this distinction.
Okay.
They point to verses where Allah is referred to as Rab Alamin, the Lord of the Worlds, that title that denotes this universal dominion.
Yeah.
In contrast, Jibril is often simply referred to as Rab, Lord, without that universal qualifier.
Okay, I'm starting to see their line of thinking here.
Yeah.
But this created Lord concept is still pretty radical, right?
Yeah.
How would mainstream Islamic scholars react to this kind of interpretation?
Safe to say it would be controversial, to say the least.
Yeah.
This interpretation directly challenges centuries of Islamic thought.
Right.
Especially around, the oneness of God.
It makes you wonder how this perspective might affect interfaith dialogues,
Yeah.
especially with Christians who have their own concept of a triune God.
Right.
Would this make those conversations
Yeah.
easier or more complicated?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It could go either way, honestly.
Okay.
On the one hand, this concept of a created but powerful being
Right.
might provide some common ground for understanding how there could be multiple persons within the divine,
Right.
which is a key part of the Christian Trinity. On the other hand, it could also make things more complicated by introducing a concept that has parallels
Right.
with Trinitarian beliefs, but within a distinctly Islamic framework.
So it's a double-edged sword,
Exactly.
potentially opening up new avenues for dialogue,
Yeah.
but also possibly creating new points of contention.
Exactly. And it highlights the fact that
Yeah.
even when there are these fundamental differences in belief, there's always room for
Mhm.
respectful dialogue
Yeah.
and a deeper understanding of each other's perspectives.
This is already making me rethink how I view these like core
Yeah.
concepts in Islam. But let's get back to
Yeah.
the authors for a second.
Okay.
They're saying Jibril is powerful, but still a creation of Allah.
Right.
How do they explain that relationship in more detail?
One of the key concepts they use is this idea of divine will.
Okay.
That they're suggesting there are different levels of will
Ah?
play within this divine structure.
Okay, break that down for a little.
Yeah.
What exactly do they mean by divine will?
Well, they're basically saying Allah's will is like
Hmm.
the ultimate law of the universe,
Okay.
unchanging and absolute.
Right.
But within that framework,
Yeah.
there's room for beings like Jibril to act with this, like created will,
Yeah.
meaning they can make choices and carry out tasks,
Mm-hmm.
but always within the boundaries set by Allah.
So it's like Allah is the author of the grand cosmic script, and Jibril is like a powerful character
Yes.
who has a certain degree of freedom to improvise,
Mhm.
but ultimately can't deviate from the plot.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And they point to specific verses in the Quran that describe
Uh-huh.
actions or events happening by the permission of Allah.
Okay.
They interpret these phrases as indicating that while Allah has this ultimate control, he delegates certain tasks and responsibilities to Jibril.
Can you give me an example of one of those tasks?
Sure. One of the key examples they highlight is Jibril's role in delivering revelations to the prophets.
Okay.
They argue that this act of revelation, while incredibly important,
Yeah.
still occurs by Allah's permission,
Right.
indicating Jibril's position within this
Yeah.
hierarchy of divine power.
Has the final say.
Exactly. And this theme of distinction just continues. He points out that only Gabriel, and not Allah, is described with the attribute Al-Karim, the noble. This suggests a difference in their, very essence.
You know, I'm struck by how he's weaving together all these seemingly disparate threads from the Quran. He's building a very nuanced and intricate argument here.
And he doesn't stop there. Remember that earlier point about creation?
Yeah.
Al-Munir argues that Gabriel creates from clay, which is earth mixed with the substance of life from Allah, while Allah creates directly from dust.
So even in their creative abilities, there's a fundamental difference.
Exactly.
Gabriel works with materials provided by Allah,
Right.
while Allah just creates directly from the most basic elements.
Exactly. And this difference in their creative processes, reinforces the idea that they are distinct entities with different levels of power. And it's really remarkable how he delves into these fine details to make his case. He even analyzes the language used to describe their justice. Allah's punishment, he points out that it's described as never being unjust, while Gabriel's justice is stated more directly.
So he's finding these subtle differences in the wording and using them to kind of build this idea of a separation between Allah's absolute and perfect justice and Gabriel's more limited role as a dispenser of justice within Allah's will.
Exactly. And then he contrasts these verses that refer to the face of God and the face of the Lord. Allah's face endures while everything else perishes, but Gabriel's face remains while everything on earth perishes.
I see. So he's highlighting this difference in scope. Allah's face represents, his eternal and all-encompassing presence, while Gabriel's face is tied to the existence of the earth.
Exactly. And this focus on contrasting scopes extends to time as well. Al-Munir brings up the fact that a day for Gabriel is 1,000 human years, while a day for Allah is 50,000 years.
Okay, so even their perception of time is vastly different. which just further emphasizes this gap between their natures. It's amazing how Al-Munir is pulling all these pieces of the puzzle together. But I have to admit, I'm still wondering, like, why does he think it's so important to make this distinction between Allah and Gabriel? What's the significance of this separation?
Well, that's where we get into like the heart of Munir's argument. He believes this separation isn't just, some theological point. It actually has like practical and philosophical implications for how we understand our relationship with the divine.
So it's not just about proving they're different, but understanding why that difference matters.
Precisely. One reason he gives is this idea of practical governance. Al-Munir criticizes the notion that obeying Allah means, rejecting all earthly authority. And he uses this analogy of a ruler and his officials.
Okay, so just as a ruler can't, govern a vast kingdom alone, Allah needs to delegate some authority for the smooth functioning of the universe, and Gabriel is that appointed authority.
Exactly. And this delegation doesn't diminish Allah's ultimate power, right? It actually reflects his wisdom in establishing a system that can effectively manage creation.
It's like a well-organized company, right? You're the CEO at the top.
Right.
But you also need managers and departments to handle different aspects of the business.
That's a great analogy. And Al-Munir goes beyond just the practical implications and brings in this fascinating element of human psychology. He argues that humans need both the abstract, which is represented by Allah, and the tangible, which is embodied by Gabriel.
So we're drawn to the mystery of Allah's infinite nature. It's interesting how he's looking at the broader context of those verses to support his interpretation.
Yeah, and he connects this to verses about this noble messenger who commands casting those who reject Allah and good deeds into hellfire. And based on other verses that link Gabriel to hellfire, Al-Munir concludes that this noble messenger is Gabriel.
It's like he's piecing together a puzzle, right? Finding these connections between these different passages to create this coherent picture of Gabriel's role and authority.
And it really underscores, I think, the complexity of interpreting religious texts. There can be multiple layers of meaning, and Al-Munir is encouraging us to look beyond just the surface and really delve into those deeper layers.
It's amazing to think that, someone could come along centuries after the Quran was revealed and offer such a radically different perspective. I have to admit, some of these arguments are really making me rethink my own understanding.
That's the power of engaging with new ideas, It can challenge our assumptions and open up new ways of seeing the world and our place in it.
I'm still processing everything we've talked about with this Gabrielian sect. It's a lot to take in, especially this idea of a hierarchy within the divine realm.
Yeah, it's definitely a shift from more traditional understandings of Islamic theology. And like we've seen, Al-Munir's really carefully crafted his arguments, drawing on a wide range of Quranic verses and interpretations.
Before we started this deep dive, I have to admit I was a little skeptical, but I got to give him credit. The depth and breadth of his analysis, it's really impressive.
It's clear that he's put a ton of thought and effort into developing this perspective. And whether or not you agree with his conclusions, I think his work definitely forces us to confront some fundamental questions about our understanding of God, creation, and the nature of authority.
One thing that really struck me was how he connects this theological concept of a separated Lord to our human experience, this idea that we need both the abstract and the tangible to really connect with the divine. That resonated with me.
It's a powerful concept, isn't it? It acknowledges the human need for both awe and intimacy. In our relationship with the divine, we're drawn to the mystery of the intimate, but we also crave a more personal, relatable connection. And Al-Munir argues that Gabriel kind of bridges that gap.
And I think that's what makes this whole exploration so fascinating. It's not just an abstract theological debate. It has implications for how we understand our own spiritual journeys.
Absolutely. And it also, I think, highlights, the diversity of thought that exists within religious traditions. Even within, a faith as established as Islam, there are individuals like Al-Munir who are willing to challenge conventional interpretations and offer these new perspectives.
So what does this all mean for our listener? What are some key takeaways from our deep dive into the Gabrielian sect?
Well, I think the first takeaway is simply the awareness that this perspective exists. It's a reminder that religious interpretation isn't monolithic. There are multiple ways of understanding and approaching sacred texts.
And it encourages us to be open to those different perspectives, even if they challenge our own beliefs.
Right.
Engaging with diverse viewpoints can really enrich our understanding and deepen our appreciation for the complexity of faith.
Another important takeaway, I think, is this emphasis on critical thinking. Al-Munir's work really demonstrates, the importance of carefully examining texts, considering different interpretations, and formulating our own conclusions.
It's like he's inviting us to be like active participants in our own religious understanding, rather than just passively accepting what we've been told.
Exactly. And that process of questioning and exploring can lead to a more, I think, profound and meaningful connection with our faith.
This deep dive has definitely left me with a lot to think about. How do these interpretations impact our understanding of prayer? If Gabriel is this like intermediary Lord, how does that change our view of communicating with the divine?
That's a great question, and it's one that Al-Munir actually addresses in his writings. He suggests that recognizing Gabriel's role as a mediator can actually enhance our appreciation for both his role and Allah's ultimate authority.
So rather than diminishing the significance of prayer, it kind of adds another layer of meaning and depth to the experience.
Precisely. And it raises even more questions, right? Like, how does this perspective impact our understanding of free will and destiny? If Gabriel plays such a big role in earthly affairs, does that influence our choices and actions?
It seems like with every answer, new questions emerge. But I think that's the beauty of, exploring these complex theological concepts. It's a journey of discovery, and there's always more to learn and uncover.
I completely agree. And I think that's the final takeaway I would offer to our listeners. Don't be afraid to question, to explore, to delve deeper into the mysteries of your faith. You might be surprised by what you find.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to continue exploring, the Gabrielian perspective, engage with its challenging ideas, and let this exploration be a spark for your own journey of discovery and understanding.
Like a go-between between humanity and like the true God, the unknowable God.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating idea, and it's something that you don't really hear very often.
Right. And so like that might sound like super out there, but stick with us. Okay, we're going to break it down.
Yeah, because the book, it really delves into some pretty thought-provoking concepts, right? Like, why would God choose to interact with us through an intermediary? What does that mean for our understanding of, prophets like Moses and Jesus and Muhammad? And how does this perspective even reconcile with traditional monotheism? All really good questions. So let's jump in.
Okay, so right off the bat, the book kind of throws us into the deep end with this idea of an incomprehensible God.
Yeah.
It's saying that God is so vast, so limitless, so infinite that our tiny human minds just can't even wrap our heads around his true nature.
Right. Like, have you ever tried to imagine what infinity actually is?
No, it hurts my brain.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. This book is arguing that God is even beyond that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So like our brains they're not equipped to handle that kind of vastness.
Exactly. And the book actually uses this really interesting thought experiment to illustrate this point. Imagine if you could actually see God.
Okay.
Right now. Wouldn't that kind of imply that he's limited to that one spot?
Yeah, like if I'm seeing him here, he can't be somewhere else at the same time, right?
Exactly. It kind of contradicts the idea of God being omnipresent.
It's like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
Right. And so this concept of God's incomprehensibility, it's not meant to diminish his power or anything like that.
Right.
It's more about emphasizing just how vast God is and how limited our human perspective is.
It's humbling, really.
It is.
When you think about it that way. Okay, so God's beyond our understanding. Then how do we even connect with him? I mean, that's where Gabriel comes in, right? That's the whole premise of this book.
Right. So the book proposes that God appointed Gabriel, who's like a super powerful angel, right, to interact with us humans. And he's acting as a kind of a more relatable, understandable representation of the divine.
Okay, so Gabriel is kind of like our translator, helping us to understand something that would otherwise be completely beyond us.
Yeah, like a divine interpreter.
Okay, I like that. But hold on, doesn't this sound kind of like we're talking about two gods here? Like God and then Gabriel?
That's a great question. And it's something that a lot of people might wonder about when they first encounter this idea. But the book is really clear that there's only one God.
Okay.
It's emphasizing a hierarchy within the divine order. God is at the very top. Then you've got Gabriel, who then oversees other angels. and they're each kind of responsible for different aspects of creation.
Okay, so it's less about two separate gods and more like God's the CEO and Gabriel's running the day-to-day operations down here.
Exactly. And that's a really important concept that the book really focuses on. This idea of like a dual lordship with God as the ultimate authority and Gabriel as the kind of the direct overseer.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this works. But how does this idea of Gabriel as the intermediary, how does that change our understanding of prophets? Like, we're talking Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, all the prophets.
That's a fantastic question. And the book really digs into that.
Okay, good.
Because if we're accepting this premise that Gabriel is the go-between, right? Right? Then it means that the prophets weren't receiving messages directly from God. They were receiving them through Gabriel, who's acting as God's mouthpiece.
Okay, so instead of like a direct line from God to the prophets, it's more like God communicates to Gabriel, Gabriel takes the message to the prophet, and then the prophet shares it with the rest of us.
Right, like a chain of communication. And the book actually points to some specific verses in the Quran that seem to support this idea. For example, Surah An-Nahl, verses 102 and 103, they describe Gabriel as the Holy Spirit who revealed the Quran to Muhammad.
Oh, wow.
And then you have verses like Surah At-Takrir 19 and Al-Waqa 40, where the one who's delivering the message, this like noble messenger, is actually identified as Gabriel, not Muhammad.
Huh. See, that's what I love about these deep dives. It makes you go back and look at these familiar passages, and suddenly they take on a whole new meaning.
It's all about perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. So, like, who's speaking and who they are in relation to God and, like, their position within this whole divide hierarchy, that all matters, right? When we're trying to understand these texts.
It's about context. You can't just take one verse in isolation. You have to understand the bigger picture.
Right, the whole context. Okay, so we've got this incomprehensible God. We've got Gabriel as the intermediary and this whole new way of looking at prophets and their role.
Right.
So then what does all of that mean for us, like for our personal relationship with God? Where do we fit into this whole picture?
That's a great question. And that's something that we're going to delve into as we continue our deep dive into the book of Gabriel is Your Means. Okay, so last time we laid out some pretty heavy ideas, right, about like the nature of God, Gabriel's role, all that.
Yeah, our brains are still like smoldering a little bit from that.
Yeah. But, you know, it's all well and good to talk about these big abstract concepts. But what does it actually mean for us?
Right? Like how does this all play out in our lives? Like how should we actually think about our own faith and our relationship with God?
Well, the book talks a lot about this idea of, it basically means turning back to God.
Okay.
Like actively seeking truth and aligning yourself with his will.
Okay, so it's not just enough to like say you believe. You have to actually make an effort.
Exactly. True faith, it's not passive. It's not just going through the motions.
Right.
It's about really engaging with like the divine message, seeking understanding, trying to live a life that's, you know, in accordance with God's teachings as they're revealed through Gabriel.
Okay, so it's like bringing your brain and your heart to the table.
Yes, exactly. It's about this like constant learning, growing, evolving in your faith.
It's a journey.
It is, and it's a very personal one, and this book really emphasizes that.
Okay, so how does this idea of like Elia, how does that tie into, you know, prayer? We were talking about dua last time.
Right, in the book, it actually makes this really fascinating distinction between like just asking for things versus truly seeking guidance.
Interesting.
So you've got dat, right, which is more about pleading for your needs.
Okay.
But then there's dua. Hey there, want to share your thoughts on this?
Please, I have a question from the audience. What are the characteristics of our Lord Gabriel mentioned in the Holy Quran?
Oh, absolutely. That's a fantastic question.
It's essential for our discussion.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The Quran actually describes him with several key characteristics.
Lay it on us.
He's frequently referred to as your Lord,
Which, as we've been discussing, emphasizes his role.
as this intermediary between God and humanity.
Right.
He's also described as most honorable,
I like that.
which highlights his esteemed position in the divine hierarchy
Makes sense.
and his trustworthiness as a messenger.
Okay, so he's honorable, trustworthy. What else?
He's known for his immense power and strength.
You can see that with the stories of him appearing to the prophets.
Right, and the Quran also emphasizes his obedience to God.
He's not acting on his own accord.
Exactly, he's carrying out divine commands.
Okay, so power, obedience,
One of the most significant characteristics is his role in delivering divine messages.
the link between God and the prophets.
Absolutely, he's the one who brings the revelations.
Okay, so he's the messenger.
That's a key part of his identity.
I think that covers it.
Those are some key characteristics of Gabriel.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Now, where were we?
We were about to shift gears.
Right, and tackle the big free will question.
Okay, let's do it. Does the Quran say we're puppets?
It's a question theologians have pondered for centuries.
Yeah.
The Quran emphasizes both predestination and human free will.
So it's not an either or situation.
We're not robots following a script.
Not at all.
God doesn't force belief.
We can choose our actions and beliefs.
Right, and we're held accountable.
But God knows what's going to happen.
Right.
Doesn't that negate our free will?
It's a common misconception.
Okay.
God's knowledge doesn't negate our ability to choose.
If a friend knows you well,
They predict your choices with accuracy.
God's foreknowledge doesn't equal predetermination.
Right, so what about guidance?
Are we on some divine GPS?
That's where the concept of guidance is important.
Okay.
God guides those who seek his path,
Yeah.
but it's not micromanagement.
So it's developing our inner compass,
Precisely.
nurturing discernment and moral reasoning,
Right.
allowing us to navigate life.
Exactly.
That's a dynamic interplay.
God provides guidance.
We choose how to respond to it,
Exactly.
starting to see how these concepts fit.
What about divine decrees?
Does that limit our choices?
Decrees.
Yeah.
That's where distinguishing God's and Gabriel's decrees is important.
God sets the universal constants.
Right, universal laws.
Gabriel handles day-to-day regulations.
Right, societal laws.
Why some decrees seem contradictory.
God's decrees are absolute.
Unchanging.
Gabriel's decrees are more contextual.
Case law.
Yeah,
Building on God's fundamental principles.
right.
Taking human society into account.
Okay, but
This allows for a dynamic interpretation.
recognizing and understanding can mature.
This is blowing my mind.
This shows that our journey of understanding continues even in the afterlife.
There's still growth and discovery in the hereafter.
Right.
There's still more to learn.
It is amazing, isn't it?
That even in bliss, there is more to understand.
It gives a new perspective.
It's not rewards and punishments.
It is our journey of spiritual evolution.
Cultivating curiosity, humility, and openness.
Yeah.
We've covered some profound ground today.
It's been a real deep dive.
It has
We've
been.
only scratched the surface.
Really?
So much more to discover.
We've given them a lot.
I hope so.
Let's circle back.
The idea that even angels have a path.
What does that tell us about their understanding of God?
Right.
What does a path look like for Gabriel?
It delves into the nature of divine knowledge.
Yeah.
God is unknowable.
Even angels grasp a fraction,
Remember, he's your Lord.
right?
Shaping events, delivering messages.
Even he is on a path.
It's a humbling thought.
Our struggles seem manageable.
Right, about embracing the journey of seeking.
Okay, Gabriel is learning, like us.
What about his decrees?
They could change over time.
That is the interesting question.
Could something haram become permissible?
That gets to the heart of interpretation.
They are guidelines for life on earth.
Yeah.
Context changes and understanding.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Thank you. I have a question from one of audience that is, how can we understand the principle of lordship of our Gabriel Lord?
That's a really insightful question.
I like it.
The Quran offers some clues.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Remember how we talked about free will?
Yeah,
Gabriel's decrees aren't set in stone.
he considers changing conditions.
Exactly. God sets universal laws.
Right.
Gabriel adapts them to society.
Kind of like understanding scientific principles.
Actually, there's a parallel.
Tell me more.
Think of scientific principles.
Okay.
They're universal truths, right?
Yeah.
But how we apply them changes.
Okay, I get it.
Just like applying religious teaching.
It's all about interpretation.
The context of your life on earth.
This opens up new perspective.
Approaching texts with curiosity.
Knowing our understanding can mature.
Our journey of understanding continues.
Nice. Now, where were we?
Considering if something haram can be permissible.
Like scientific knowledge?
The same principle applies to our teachings.
Notions that religious laws are set in stone.
The principles need to be applied.
Approaching the text with inquiry.
Our understanding is a work in progress.
It is an ongoing dialogue. This
Yes,
has been eye-opening.
the pleasure was mine.
I'm walking away with appreciation.
May our listeners feel a sense of curiosity.
Well said.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in,
Keep those minds curious, those hearts open.
and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Oh, yeah. Let's hear it.
Hello, I have another question from the audience. They ask, how can the companions of Prophet Muhammad, how can they don't mention any word of the lordship of Gabriel, although there are a lot of evidence of this lordship in Quran?
That is a thought-provoking question.
Definitely worth exploring.
It raises some important points.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The Quran mentions the word Lord.
You mean as your Lord?
Exactly, it was used to refer to Gabriel.
Right.
The Quran emphasizes Gabriel's role.
As an intermediary between God and humanity.
Perhaps the companions focused on God.
Makes sense.
God is the ultimate source of guidance.
Maybe that is why.
Or because the Quran emphasizes God and Gabriel's directives.
Could be.
The Quran also describes him as honorable,
Highlighting his esteemed position.
as a messenger of God.
It makes sense.
Remember what we just discussed?
How Gabriel's decrees are contextual.
Exactly.
His decrees provide human guidance.
Considering changing societal conditions.
Kind of like understanding scientific principles.
Actually, there's a parallel.
Now I see.
It's all about interpretation.
The context of your life.
Approaching text with curiosity.
Knowing our understanding can mature.
I hope this gives new perspective.
It does.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Now, where were we?
To close out,
Right.
may your search for knowledge continue.
And bring you closer to the divine.
And I hope our discussion today leaves you thinking.
Maybe inspired to explore these ideas further.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Until next time,
Goodbye.
keep learning. Welcome to another deep dive. And this, oh, hey there, what's up?
Another question, they ask, what is the sign or the evidence in Quran that points to the fact that Gabriel was like us, like a human or a normal creature?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it really gets to the heart of this topic.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you're asking where in the Quran does it suggest Gabriel's significance?
There's not one single verse that screams Gabriel is the key.
Right.
It's more about piecing together different verses. Okay. And understanding the nuances of the language.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our source text points out a few key things.
What's fascinating here is the use of your Lord.
Our sources suggest that your Lord often refers to Gabriel.
I think I understand. You're asking about evidence in the Quran that Gabriel.
Well, I was like, what, listener? What was Gabriel like?
While we wait for clarification, maybe we can explore Gabriel's role
Okay, let's unpack this. According to our source, the Quran often describes Gabriel.
as delivering messages. There are many messengers. So what's special here?
Well, the text mentions, say, "O Muhammad, I am only a warner by revelation," instead of God directly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we start to see a pattern.
It suggests Gabriel is this mediator.
Someone who acts as this intermediary,
You remember when we were about to mention Surah Al-Anbiya?
highlighting his direct involvement in prophetic missions.
It's all about looking at the context.
What stands out to you about this?
Okay, I think we should jump back into our plan.
That's it?
That's actually what really jumped out at me when I was looking at these sources.
Right. This suggests that Muhammad's warnings aren't his own invention.
Right, it's a revelation from Gabriel.
What's fascinating here is the Quran emphasizes that Gabriel delivers messages.
So it's not just about what is said, but how it's communicated.
Exactly. We could think of Gabriel like a really important messenger.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This idea that the Quran isn't just God speaking directly to us,
Yeah.
but it also includes these perspectives from angels.
Exactly.
It's almost like, you're listening in on a conversation.
Yeah. And that's why it's so important to understand who's speaking,
Oh, interesting.
which are often used interchangeably in translations.
I see.
Acts as this kind of mediator between God and humanity.
Okay, so when the Quran says your Lord, it's not always talking about God.
Right.
That's a pretty big revelation.
Absolutely. A really striking example is in Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 21.107,
Wow.
highlighting his direct involvement in prophetic missions.
That's pretty clear cut when you put it that way.
Yeah. What's that?
The listener is clarifying. They're wondering, what is the sign or the evidence in the Quran that points to the fact that Gabriel was like the Holy Spirit?
Ah, that's a great question. If we connection to the bigger picture,
Oh, go for it.
No, the listener was asking what is the sign in Quran that point that Gabriel was a normal creation, a normal creature before he is now a Lord.
I see you're asking about signs in the Quran
Signs that show Gabriel was once a normal creation.
before becoming a Lord, as you say.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The Quran doesn't explicitly state that,
That Gabriel was a normal creation at one point.
but the Quran calls Jesus a spirit from him.
Right.
The text implies Gabriel might also have evolved.
So he's not just a messenger,
Wait, yeah.
but the Quran emphasizes his unique qualities.
More specifically, speech that's divinely accurate.
The text says speech that no human can achieve.
The Holy Spirit delivers divine speech.
But where does Gabriel fit in?
He's acting as sort of an administrator.
Like shaping events in the world.
Exactly.
Like he's the CEO of the universe.
With God as the chairman of the board.
Letting Gabriel handle the day-to-day management.
That's a good analogy.
Okay, back to where we were.
What stood out to you previously?
How the Holy Spirit enables special people.
With Gabriel assisting in that process.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
That's what jumped out at me when I read the sources.
It highlights different levels of authority.
And accessibility within the divine hierarchy.
He's interacting with humanity more directly.
Stories about Gabriel appearing to the prophet
take on a whole new meaning.
It's not just delivering a message.
Yeah.
There's still plenty we need to discuss.
Sure.
So what does this all mean?
It raises a question about interpreting the Quran.
The text says, thus we must interpret precisely.
Oh, back to our listener. What's up?
Thank you. There is another question. Does or can our Lord Gabriel choose what he does, or he does what he do obligatory?
That's a really thought-provoking question.
You're asking if Gabriel has free will.
Or if his actions are predetermined.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The Quran describes the path.
The word for path in the Quran is sabil.
But it doesn't mean a literal road, of course.
Sabil refers to a way of thinking.
An intellectual direction.
To focus your thoughts on a specific topic.
It's about finding a way, justification.
Or solution for something.
All these meanings are abstract, not physical.
Thinking about the path helps.
The path connects to your question about choice.
So back to Gabriel.
The Quran uses Sabil to show ways of thinking.
For instance, we will guide them to our ways.
Striving leads to guidance, but not force.
This suggests Gabriel's role may not be rogatic.
You then decide which path to follow, right?
Which reminds me of another verse.
About who God guides and misguides.
Right, God misguides whom he wills.
And guides to himself whom turns back.
Does this relate to Gabriel?
It raises an important question.
If God guides people to Allah, it means what?
Enabling them to deduce a law themselves.
Make your own interpretation.
That verse suggests free will is a gift.
Yeah.
We can only grasp a fraction of his essence.
Okay, that makes sense.
It sets the stage for understanding prophets.
To the earlier point, not all are the same.
Yeah.
Quran distinguishes between prophets.
They have different roles in God's plan.
Like we said, not all prophets are created equal.
No, but it relates to Gabriel's role.
Miraculous abilities and knowledge were limited.
Okay, so there are levels to prophethood.
Yeah, and maybe to angels too.
And this is a bit surprising,
It highlights the complexity
but also the freedom within divine order.
and supports what we've already learned.
I think that's a great place to stop for today.
Thanks for joining our journey of discovery.
We hope you join us next time.
I hope this episode has. Oh, yeah,
But please, if you can answer from my books this question, how can we see Gabriel in this life or in hereafter?
That's a profound question.
You're asking if we can see Gabriel.
Either now or in the afterlife.
Let's see if we can find anything about that.
Our sources are silent about seeing him.
But they do talk about experiencing him,
Remember when we spoke about speech?
about accurate speech and so forth.
We may see Gabriel through inspiration,
That is, if the Quran equates him to truth.
a revelation, something really profound.
Maybe that is a way of seeing him.
Yeah, let's get back to the original plan.
Okay, so what was the big takeaway for you?
It's a better understanding of the Quran,
Absolutely.
which is a message from Gabriel.
Right, and we interpret it through the Holy Spirit.
What's fascinating here is it all connects,
When you consider all of these verses,
and you understand the role of Gabriel.
it all starts to click into place.
It makes you think about inspiration.
But also what it means to be faithful
It's about surrendering to God's will.
and understanding Gabriel's role in that.
Yeah, and a better understanding of the Quran.
So what does this all mean?
Well, I think it raises an important question.
Which is
What's the cost of free will?
free will
Freedom isn't free.
Right.
The Quran emphasizes the need to strive,
to do good works,
to help others.
to earn God's grace.
I mean, with free will comes great responsibility.
As someone very smart once said,
To understand the Quran more deeply,
to understand the role of Gabriel in that process.
to use our free will wisely.
Okay. I think that's all we have for today.
Thanks for your thought-provoking questions.
We hope you join us next time.
Until then, keep exploring.
And hey, yeah, what's up?
There's a question, how does who doesn't believe in God at all, how does he see or consider Gabriel?
Okay, that's a really interesting question.
You're asking how someone without faith views Gabriel.
Someone that doesn't believe in God at all.
I think we need to think about this.
Our source text offers some clues.
It talks about different levels of understanding.
And about those who are misguided.
those who stray from the straight path.
Right.
If we connect this to your question, maybe someone who doesn't believe sees Gabriel
As just another myth.
or a symbol of something else.
Like a cultural figure.
Yeah, a legend.
A story passed down through generations.
The text says, God misguides whom he wills
And guides to himself whom turns back,
to guide others to a specific way.
which can be based on faith.
So, someone without faith in God,
May not be able to see.
Gabriel's divine nature,
But maybe they can appreciate.
the story, the symbolism, history.
It's a different perspective, definitely. We were just talking about free will and how it relates to faith.
To understand the Quran more deeply,
To understand the role of Gabriel in that process.
to use our free will wisely.
Okay.
Hopefully, this has offered a new perspective
Let's get back to what we were discussing.
about understanding Gabriel.
Okay, so what does this all mean?
Well, I think it raises an important question.
Which is
What's the cost of free will?
free will.
Freedom isn't free.
Right.
The Quran emphasizes the need to strive,
To do good works.
to help others.
To earn God's grace.
I mean, with free will comes great responsibility
As someone very smart once said,
to understand the Quran more deeply,
to understand the role of Gabriel in that process.
to use our free will wisely.
Okay. I think that's all we have for today.
Thanks for your thought. Oh, yeah. Go on.
There is a question. How can our Lord Gabriel help us in our daily things or daily affairs?
That's a great question.
If we connect that to our earlier chat,
Then what?
then we might say it's about influence.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Gabriel delivers messages from God.
Which can inspire us.
The source text mentions different levels of faith.
Yeah, and devotion.
Well, the Quran also emphasizes action,
About doing good works.
about helping those around us.
So back to Gabriel.
It is about guidance, not just a divine push.
Does this mean free will comes into play?
Precisely.
Gabriel helps us by offering this guidance.
It all connects to understanding the Quran.
All that we've been discussing so far.
We need to use our free will wisely.
So we can strive to do good in our lives.
Hopefully that provides a new angle.
Now let's get back to where we were. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're going to be exploring these really intricate concepts, Sirat and Sabil.
Okay?
And all this comes from a book by Firas al-Munir. It's called Kitab al-Fatiha.
Interesting title.
Yeah, and the whole book's focused on interpreting the Quran. You know, and especially that super powerful phrase, Ahedna Siratal Mustaqim, that's guide us to the straight path from Surah al-Fatiha.
Right. That's like the heart of the prayer, right? Asking for guidance.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating about Al-Munir is a preface level explanation. He goes like deep into all.
To help us really understand that core phrase.
Yes, exactly. He's like, what do you call those scientists who dig up fossils and ancient cities?
Archaeologist.
Yes, he's like a linguistic archaeologist, unearthing layers of meaning that we might miss otherwise. So, like, one of the first things that just blew my mind was his take on Sabil.
Okay, Sabil, that's usually translated as path, right?
Right. And, you know, we often think of a path as something physical, like a road or a trail. But Al-Munir argues that Sabil is more about our mental orientation, the direction our thoughts are taking us. It's like, what path are your thoughts creating right now?
That's interesting. So it's not just about the actions we take, but the thoughts that lead us to those actions.
Exactly. And he uses such like vivid examples to illustrate this. Imagine a woman who feels confined, you know, like she's snapped in her own home. Her Sabil is that yearning for a way out, that mental energy she's putting towards finding a solution.
Oh, I see. So even though she's physically stuck, her Sabil, her mental path, is all about seeking liberation, finding a way to break free.
Precisely. But then he also flips it and shows how Sabil can also describe negative thought patterns. You know, like someone who's plotting to like cheat on their partner, their Sabil is a path of betrayal and deception.
Right. So it's like a double-edged sword. Our thoughts can guide us towards positive outcomes or lead us down a dark path. It all depends on the direction of our Sabil.
Exactly. And you know what's even more mind-blowing?
What's that?
Al-Munir suggests that even our ability to choose between gratitude and ingratitude is guided.
Wow. So it's not just about what decision we make, but even the process of making that decision.
Yeah, it's like our Sabil, our way of thinking, is being shaped and guided even before we reach a conclusion. I mean, I had never thought of it that way before.
It really makes you stop and think, what kind of mental pathways am I reinforcing every single day?
Right. Okay, get ready for this next one because this one really like messed with my head. He talks about Sawa.
Sawa, what does that mean?
So basically, it means common ground, like the lowest point of something that helps us achieve equality.
Okay. How does he explain that?
Well, hold on to your hats because the example he uses is intense. He describes the lowest level of hell as the Sawa il Jahim.
Whoa, okay. That's a pretty vivid image.
Right. And the point he's making is that no matter how different the levels of hell might seem, they all share that same base level, that Sawa.
I see. So even in the midst of all that suffering and diversity of punishment, there's this underlying commonality.
Yeah, and it got me thinking, isn't it kind of like finding common ground in a heated argument? Like you and the other person might have totally opposite views, but you need to find that shared starting point, that sawa, before you can even begin to understand each other.
That's a great analogy. It's like recognizing that even in the midst of differences, there's a fundamental level where we can connect and build understanding.
Right, and that connection, that sawa, is essential for any kind of meaningful dialogue or reconciliation to happen.
It's like finding that common thread that binds us together, even when everything else seems to be pulling us apart.
Exactly. Okay, so now he brings in this idea of sabik, which means like those who excel.
Sabik, okay.
And he contrasts it with awalun, which just means those who came first. So it's not about being the first one there, but about the quality of your actions, the excellence you bring to the table.
Oh, interesting. So it's not about being the first to show up, but about making a meaningful contribution, about excelling in what you do.
Exactly. Al-Munir emphasizes that sabik suggests a vertical progression, like not just moving forward in time, but rising above through your good deeds and character.
I like that, a vertical progression. It's like climbing a mountain. It's not about who gets to base camp first, but who ultimately reaches the summit.
Yes. It's about pushing yourself to be better, to achieve a higher level of moral excellence.
But isn't there a risk with this whole Sabik thing? Like, could it lead to people trying to outdo each other in terms of righteousness? You know, becoming more concerned with appearing good than actually being good.
That's such a good point. I think the key here is to focus on self-improvement, like striving for excellence in our own conduct without comparing ourselves to others.
Yeah, it's about that inward journey, not about outward appearances or trying to impress others.
Right. So it's less about being better than others and more about being the best version of ourselves.
Exactly. It's about constantly refining our character, working on those qualities that elevate us morally and spiritually.
And this actually connects perfectly to his next concept, Sara, which means hastening or striving. It's all about the effort we put in, that continual striving towards excellence rather than just fixating on the end result.
Oh, I see. So it's the journey, that constant effort to improve, that truly defines us, not just the destination.
Right. And he points out that Sara is about the action itself, while Sabik, that excellence we talked about, is more like the outcome of all that consistent effort.
Got it. So one is about the process, the doing, the other is about the result. But they're both connected.
Exactly. It reminds me of that saying, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. You know, we get so caught up in achieving our goals that we forget to appreciate the process of learning and growing along the way.
Totally. And I think that's where Al-Munir's insights are so valuable. He's urging us to shift our focus, to value the process as much as the outcome.
Okay, so speaking of journeys, his breakdown of the concept of guidance, Huda, is fascinating. He actually distinguishes between guidance from three sources: Allah, Rab, which is Lord, and then the highest assembly, which in Arabic is Enmadola.
Three sources. That's interesting.
Right, it's like we have three guides on our journey, each playing a different role.
Okay, I'm curious. What are these roles?
So according to Al-Munir, the highest assembly grants us the ability to make choices, our free will.
Ah, so they're like the map makers. They give us the options, the potential paths to choose from.
Exactly. Then Allah comes in and empowers us to actually act on those choices. He gives us the strength and ability to navigate the terrain, to put our decisions into practice.
Okay, so one gives us the potential, the other gives us the power to act. What about the third guide, Rob?
Rab Al-Munir says is the one who provides the inspiration and guidance to make wise and balanced choices. Like, he illuminates the path, showing us which direction to take.
Wow, so we've got the map makers, the ones who empower us to travel, and then the light bearers who show us the way. That's a pretty incredible way to think about guidance.
Right, it shows how interconnected everything is. We're not alone on this journey, but we also have the freedom to choose our own path.
It's a beautiful balance of divine support and human agency. We're guided, but we're also free.
Exactly. Now, I want to talk about Surat for a minute. He introduces this really interesting distinction between Surat with the Alif and Surat without the Alif.
With and without the Alif. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What's the difference?
So basically, he's differentiating between the theory and the practice. Surat without the Alif is like the blueprints, the set of rules and guidelines, the abstract principles.
I see. So that's like having the Ten Commandments written down, the laws, the do's and don'ts.
Exactly. But Surat with the Alif, that's where we take those blueprints and actually construct something tangible. It's about applying those principles to real life situations. Like, how do those principles apply to, say, ethical dilemmas in technology or modern financial practices?
Oh, that's a great point. It's the difference between having a recipe and actually baking the cake. The recipe gives you the ingredients and instructions, but then you have to factor in all these real world variables.
Right, your oven temperature, your skill level, even the humidity in the air.
Exactly. It's the Surat with the Alif that bridges the gap between the ideal and the real.
And that's where Al-Munir's emphasis on understanding and application really shines through. It's not enough to just memorize the rules. We have to know how to apply them to our own unique circumstances.
It's about taking those big ideas and translating them into concrete actions.
It makes me think about how we often approach religious teachings. We can get so caught up in debates about dogma and interpretation, but ultimately it's about how those teachings inform our actions.
Right. It's about how they help us navigate the complexities of actually being human.
Right, and that's where I think the concept of Sabil comes back into play in a powerful way. If Surat without the Alif is the set of guidelines, then Sabil is our mental process of figuring out how to apply those guidelines. It's about having the right mindset to translate those abstract principles into concrete actions that reflect our faith and values.
Whoa, wait a minute. Are you saying Gabriel is our Lord? Like there's Allah, the ultimate source, and then Gabriel who acts on Allah's behalf.
You got it. And what's even more interesting is that these sources actually highlight how Gabriel has limitations compared to Allah.
Really? Angels aren't all powerful like we usually think of them.
That's what these sources are suggesting. For example, one of the sources describes Gabriel in this council with other angels. They're all making decisions together, which kind of implies that even an archangel like Gabriel can't just do whatever he wants.
Huh, that's fascinating. It's like even in heaven, there's this system of checks and balances.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like Gabriel is running the show on his own.
So what other clues do these sources give us about this whole hierarchy thing?
Well, they also point out that Gabriel can't perform miracles in Allah's name. Like, for example, he can't bring the sun from the west. Only Allah has that kind of power.
Wow. Okay, so there's a clear line between what Allah can do and what Gabriel can do. So if Gabriel isn't all powerful, then how does he actually do God's will in the world?
That's where things get really interesting. The sources say that both the good stuff and the bad stuff ultimately come from Allah. But Gabriel is the one who puts those decrees into action.
Okay, so like if Allah is the architect, Gabriel is like the contractor making sure the plans get built.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. It helps us understand how the divine world and the material world work together.
Okay, all this is super interesting, but how does it affect us down here on Earth? I mean, how do these concepts actually play out in our lives?
That's the big question, right? And the sources have some really insightful answers. One of the things they suggest is that understanding Gabriel's role can actually help us be more successful in this life.
Wait, hold up. Are we saying that just by recognizing Gabriel as our Lord, things will start going better for us?
That's what the sources seem to be saying. They talk about how when we ask Gabriel for help, we're tapping into this powerful source of divine energy and support.
So it's like we're aligning ourselves with this cosmic hierarchy and opening ourselves up to more blessings and opportunities.
Exactly. But it's not like we can just sit back and expect miracles to happen. The sources are very clear that we still need to put in the work, make good choices, and take practical steps to reach our goals.
So it's more like a partnership. We're not just waiting around for Gabriel to hand us everything on a silver platter. We have to do our part too.
Exactly. And when we do that, the sources suggest that amazing things can happen. They give examples of people who have achieved incredible success in their careers, their relationships, and their personal lives, all because they recognized Gabriel's role as our Lord.
You know, this actually reminds me of all that stuff you hear in self-help books, like thoughts become things and you attract what you focus on. It's like by acknowledging Gabriel's role, we're shifting our focus to a higher power and allowing ourselves to connect with this greater force that can help us make our dreams a reality.
That's a great connection. It shows how the spiritual and material worlds are totally intertwined. What we do down here on Earth has spiritual consequences and vice versa.
So we're not just talking about spiritual growth here. This understanding can actually have real practical benefits in every area of our lives.
That's exactly what the sources say. They emphasize that seeking help from Gabriel isn't just for spiritual stuff, it can also help us with our worldly goals and challenges.
So if I'm struggling with a tough decision at work or having problems in my personal life, I can actually turn to Gabriel for guidance and support.
Absolutely. The sources encourage us to go to Gabriel with humility and sincerity, acknowledging his role as our Lord and asking what is help in navigating all the ups and downs of life.
Wow, this is a total game changer. It's like having this wise mentor, this powerful advocate, this divine problem solver all rolled into one.
It really is. And it reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles. We have access to this incredible source of divine support that's always there for us.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. This whole conversation is so much deeper and more nuanced than the typical talk about God and angels.
I know, right? And we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in these sources.
But I'm all ears. What else could you tell us about this fascinating relationship between Allah Gabriel and